Hey everybody, today we're going to be diving into some of the major blood vessels that you have in your body. So video 51 here, we're going to look at some of the major arteries, some of the major veins, excuse me, that you have running through the body. And so the major ones that we have here, when we talk about the path of blood through the body, and we include that question as part of quizzes and tests or anything like that, the major blood vessels that we cover here are going to be ones that you need to consider for that path of blood. So for example, any sort of blood vessel that is headed to the head, we're going to talk about a couple major ones. Delivering blood to the brain, you will need to remember those in your path of blood question as well. So blood goes from arteries to arterioles to capillaries and then to venules and then veins. And so we can think of this as sort of like a highway system of blood being delivered and then returning back to the heart. The largest artery is going to be the aorta, and the largest veins are going to be your inferior and superior vena cava. We've already mentioned those in a previous video. But as those blood vessels are leaving the heart and going to deliver blood wherever they're headed to, they're going to progressively get smaller. So going from arteries to arterioles to capillaries, they're getting very, very small. So you just have these branches coming off like lanes of a highway leaving and making the main road smaller as each lane is leaving. And then the opposite is going to happen as it's returning back to the heart, from capillaries to venules to veins. They're going to be adding lanes to that highway, and they're going to progressively get bigger. At the capillary level, it's the very, very smallest it can be. You'll see a capillary bed spread out over structures, which is going to allow for nutrient exchange to take place. Some nutrients that you'll see exchanged here: oxygen, carbon dioxide, glucose, some salt as well. But because capillaries are at the smallest that those blood vessels are going to subdivide, that's going to be the optimum place to allow for nutrient exchange to take place. And they're going to be spread out through lots and lots of tissues and over lots and lots of tissues to be able to cover everything that requires nutrients. Arteries and veins are going to have 3 layers of tissue found within them if you were to look at a cross-section of them. The outer layer being the tunica adventitia. It's going to be made of very tough connective tissue that's going to resist any sort of bursting when that blood vessel is under pressure. The middle layer is going to be the tunica media. It's going to be made of smooth muscle. It's thicker in arteries than it is in veins, because of the higher pressures that are required in those arteries when compared to veins. And so this is going to be the smooth muscle that's able to carry out or at least push and maintain pressure as that blood is flowing through. The deepest layer is going to be the tunica intima, which is going to be made of a single layer of squamous epithelial cells. Veins are going to include one-way valves that prevent the backflow of blood. So they're going to be including the tunica adventitia, the media, the intima, but they're also going to have valves on the inside to prevent blood from flowing backwards. And actually, when those valves start to fail, that's when you start to see the pooling of blood, and you can actually get things like varicose veins and bruises even. Capillaries, since they are the smallest subdivision of all the blood vessels, they're not going to have a tunica adventitia or tunica media. They are only going to have the tunica intima. So it's going to be a single cell thick, and then when they're pressed right up against a body cell, that means that the oxygen, the carbon dioxide, the glucose only has to pass through 2 cells in order to either move into this body cell or into the bloodstream. And so it's very, very easy for them to pass through just 2 cells because those capillaries are so microscopic. In front of capillaries, you'll see these pre-capillary sphincters or pre-cap sphincters that will determine which capillaries will receive blood. So if you think blood flow flowing from one direction to the other through these capillaries, the capillary bed will kind of be spread out over top of these. The pre-capillary sphincters can close or open to determine if blood is going to be flowing through. Those capillaries specifically in that capillary bed if whether or not they need it. This is especially helpful when you need to redirect blood towards your skeletal muscles. So for example, if you have capillary beds over some of your digestive organs, and then you have something that triggers your fight or flight response, and you need to redirect blood and nutrients to your skeletal muscles. Those pre-cap sphincters are going to close and prevent blood from really being able, or not completely prevent blood, but prevent most of your blood from being able to get delivered to those internal, those digestive organs. And so that blood will end up being redirected back towards your skeletal muscles to provide them with an overabundance of nutrients just in case you need to fight or run or something like that. And you can see here, at its most efficient, your muscles can receive 6 times the normal amount of blood flow because of these pre-capillary sphincters. As for the function of blood vessels, we've mentioned arteries are going to always take blood away from the heart, regardless of if that's the pulmonary artery or any other artery that you have in the body. Generally, it's oxygenated, except for in that pulmonary artery or the pulmonary trunk that splits into the right and left pulmonary artery as it's taking deoxygenated blood away from the heart towards the lungs. Arterioles, they're able to constrict and dilate to maintain normal blood pressure, and so they have that tunica media to be able to do that. Veins and venules will always take blood always take blood to the heart, including that pulmonary vein, which is including oxygenated blood for that pulmonary vein as it returns to the heart from the lungs. You do have some special venous systems, including the hepatic portal system, which is where digestive veins are going to go through the liver on their way to the heart so that that liver is able to clean them up, clean out any toxins, any glucose, anything like that that it needs to pick out of it before they make their way to the heart. Veins also have the ability to expand or constrict to hold different amounts of blood depending on what is needed. And like we mentioned, capillaries, their function is to exchange nutrients in those capillary beds. So some major arteries that you have, the internal and external carotid artery. You're probably familiar with these. They're going to supply blood to the brain, neck, and head. Going to run through your neck here. You do also have the left subclavian artery, which is going to supply blood to your left upper extremity or your left arm. Subclavian meaning it sits below the clavicle. The brachiocephalic is going to supply blood to the head and arm, and so it's one of the major branches off of the aorta. The coronary artery we saw in our dissection where it's going to branch directly off the aorta and feed the heart its own personal supply of oxygen and nutrients and everything like that. The renal arteries is going to be headed to the kidneys. We'll get into the urinary system later this semester. Brachial artery is going to supply blood to the arm, and so you can tell it's going to come off of the brachiocephalic artery as one of the branches and be specific to the arm. Femoral artery, referring to the femoral region, the femur, the thigh region. This is one of the major ones that you don't want to sever, but can be severed in things like car accidents, we'll see. And you can see some of the branches and everything here. So that subclavian arteries, those brachial arteries coming off, external, internal carotid, all the way down femoral, and some others that you can see there. As for the major veins, another one you're probably familiar with is the jugular vein. The external and internal jugular are going to drain the brain, head, and neck, kind of the opposite of the carotid artery. You do also have the subclavian vein that's going to drain your arms. The pulmonary vein, as we mentioned during our heart box diagram video, where it's going to be returning oxygenated blood back to the heart. The inferior vena cava, draining the lower half of the body, everything that is inferior to the heart. The hepatic vein, remember, all those blood vessels taking a detour through the liver, they are returning back to the heart, and so once it has exited the liver, it becomes the hepatic vein and is headed superior to the heart. Here you can see some other veins. The superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava here. The heart obviously is removed, but would sit in this location right here. You can see the renal veins. Again, we'll go over those during our urinary system. and some of the others, axillary, subclavian, brachiocephalic, everything related to that. So those are some of the major arteries and veins and the functions of blood vessels that we have in the body. Don't forget those three layers are very important to know. The three layers, the tunica adventitia, the tunica media, and the tunica intima, as well as just knowing the path going from arteries to arterioles to capillaries and then to venules and then veins.